He knows, and we have these subcommittees, like he knew the school stuff just because he was on that building committee thing and all that stuff.
But there's a difference between having, so this is where, remember that graph we showed where there's all these projects and then everybody talks about their own position and their own likes and their own dislikes, and all of a sudden we don't get anything done, which is why we weren't able to, we would never have been able to get through the projects we get through under that process. I'm not suggesting people can't express their positions on those. I'm just suggesting that as opposed to in the discussion period.
Okay, I like what you're saying about information.
It's about information.
That's a better way of describing what I'm looking for.
Okay, I just wanted to suggest that we think about that.
Much better way to describe it.
I have a one that we could use
Well,
as a test.
wait one sec, because Jason was,
Okay.
he had something I wanted.
I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we can't hear from each other each time. And
Right,
the
we should.
facilitator can pull us back when it starts to get off a tangent or political or away from information. And we trust you to do that. But I do want to hear from almost everybody on every situation. It's not, there are times at the select board level where I come in and I'm like, here's how I'm going to vote. I've read about it, I've talked to people, and I really listen to Matt or Rita. I really listen. And I might either vote differently or I think about it, but I'm not swayed politically. It's like they made a really good point and we had a good discussion. And that's
what I'm looking for.
That's what a really good board is. And I trust everybody here. Yeah, there's going to be perspective and there's going to be, I guess, agendas just because I believe in bike paths and safety. So of course I'm going to push infrastructure, bike paths. So that's my agenda, but it's not like a weird under the table political.
And I wasn't suggesting. I don't
think you're suggesting.
Yeah, not that anyone has that.
I like to hear, even when you bring up Island Home things, because you've been on that issue and you've thought about it. I like that when you say XYZ about our Island Home projects. Just for example, that just stuck out in my head. So you are an expert in a lot of things just because you've been paying attention. So I would like more discussion and then trust the facilitator to pull us back in when it gets a little awry.
I think something that might be worth talking about, I don't know if Rebecca can chime in on this, but when the staff or the town admin sort of ranking is like way off of what we rank, that like was eye-opening this year for me. Like I'm like, I wonder what they're thinking there. I think you were like really looking at that because I remember you mumbling about it a couple of times. Like, what's going on here? What's this a 10 for? You know what I mean? Like it's like here we are going hum-diddy-dum, and all of a sudden we see this, and there's got to be a reason. Yeah. So
I think we have a very strict, I would say, like vetting process as we've gone through the Rory's internally. I don't want to speak for the town manager because ultimately those numbers were reflective of her rankings. But when we have discussed them, I think that we almost seem to take like a stricter.
When you say strict, you mean money strict or like
not
timing?
Not necessarily always funding wise.
Do they have the resources to complete the project?
Yes,
yes. Is there something else coming down the line?
And I think tying back to what you were saying about understanding the inner workings, I think, of course, us being the staff that are literally in the thick of it every day, we have the best understanding of that. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from, is, again, understanding, do we think this department has the resources for this? Or do we think that this is something that they can get to this year or will benefit them this year? Or so I think that's sort of where some of the discrepancies come from, because you, as a committee, I think, from what I saw last year, tended to be more on a similar page from where we as town administration and staff.
Because I think that stuff is wicked important for this committee.
But so
you're not necessarily every little person's thought, but maybe a general explanation of why you rank something.
I think going back to the point about coming up with some type of guidelines when looking at the Rorys would be really helpful for town admin.
Yes.
Just to kind of see where Capcom's coming from, when they're filling them out, and then not change how town admin is ranking them, but just kind of better understand where you guys are coming from when you're ranking them, and then maybe those can be aligned, because it may just be as simple as a
Typo.
different opinion of what
How.
something
Yeah.
means.
Yeah,
So I think the guidelines would be very helpful internally, and obviously externally it would just be a lot clearer to the public of how these are actually being ranked.
yeah.
And that transfers over to when, just to comment briefly, when we get the green sheet out to liaisons to the FinCom and the Select Board, and there's also an understanding through this strategic integrational planning group, a couple members of the Select Board, a couple members of CAPCOM, a couple members of the FinCom, we can be discussing, the idea there is that we're integrating efforts to reconcile. I did a little thing on it. You know what, I'll bring that up when we get to it. I don't want to go off on a tangent. So on the Rory, on the guidelines, I agree with you. I think that can be useful to not only this committee for various purposes, but also for others who are looking in, and not just the general public. And then I would, just to go back to, so for me as the facilitator, I'm looking at our schedule, and I'm not suggesting, there's some things that need to change with the schedule, but more with respect to getting requests in and having deadlines, so that we're not coming in and reviewing half a project and not having the information, and it's a lot of energy, and I think it's wasteful. But the database is going to control that, and the way the finance department is going to structure that, my understanding is that if it isn't completed, it's not going to move forward. So we just need to determine a date as to when we would accept requests. And I think what we're going to do this year, a little bit more fine tuning on what departments are ready, and then give them their deadlines earlier because they're ready. And the departments who need a little bit longer may have them, but they need to meet their deadline or the project doesn't get reviewed. I'm segueing into schedule. I guess what I wanted to say was, as part of that discussion of scheduling, is the amount of time we spend here. And if we're talking about particular projects, I think we're just gonna have to wing it and see, even if everyone shared all the information they had, and I'm not suggesting we have to, on a particular project, but not their position, which can create other discussions, we could be here for a long time. So the Rory, just to be clear, was meant to try and limit that aspect of it. I absolutely do not I absolutely agree that more discussion in general, even if it brings in legitimate positions on, agendas based on personal beliefs or feelings, or strategic plans from the Select Board, or the FinCom's positions versus maybe the Select Board's. I think that's all legitimate, and my task is going to be to figure out how to make sure that discussion for however many projects we have, if we have 88 or 90, fits into our schedule. And I just ask you guys, it's nothing personal, but I'm going to try and steer us towards, give us your information. If you articulate your position, that's fine too, but we won't have the time to go off too much into discussion on the merits of the position unless they are unless it's information that informs your position that underlies the discussion. Does it make sense? It has to be information based. It can't just be, we just don't have time to sit here and each discuss our position on every project.
If that's the case, I just want to throw this is.
Yeah, please. This is my concern.
It's almost this is just not a joke, but if that's the case, if we can't talk, then just tape each department head, give the presentation, and email it to everybody. We can watch it and then do the Rory online and give it to you.
Yeah,
if not, then we can't.
No, but
the advantage of us is to hear from each other.
But that's that's
an extreme. Just
it's
for
a
an
real
example.
extreme, because I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that you guys be sensitive to the fact that scheduling is a huge issue for us, because it comes out in the tail end on the finance department and me in getting a report together, and we're not getting support from the Select Board on late dates, and we're not getting support from the FinCom on late dates. We're getting, well, why is the CAPCOM always late? And it's like, well, wait a minute, the CAPCOM is processing this information as quickly and efficiently as it can, and we can only do so much with what we have. So I'm looking at that reality, and then the reality of having in-depth discussions on every project. And I just want to be clear, I'm in no way suggesting we shouldn't discuss things. To be perfectly clear, if someone wants to bring up a topic, bring it up. My job here is not to shut down discussion. My job is trying to facilitate that everyone gets information so they can make informed decisions. And I'm just simply saying that if we get into articulating positions without articulating what they're based on, we could go off in discussions about positions forever. It's I think the most important part for the committee is informing us why you have that position. Like Jason used an example, the bike pass. Well, the select board has strategic plans for X, Y, and Z when it comes to using bicycles. It relates to our traffic management plan. It relates in this way, and so on and so forth. Like you're actually sharing information that's useful for everyone. I'm not suggesting no one won't do that. I'm just saying please be cognizant of, all of you, please be cognizant that that's going to be kind of a tension that we'll have, not a bad tension, but just a tension in the process of trying to make sure we get through it in a timely manner if we're expanding what we're doing at the table. I fully support that, having those discussions. I'm not saying no.
I have another question,
Yeah.
thought, but it's separate. But you had your, Rebecca, what did you?
Oh, I just, there was something that you said a couple minutes ago that made me think, I guess, just depending on what you want to do as far as developing sort of a baseline or guideline for how you want to use the Rory, it occurred to me thinking back to our discussions last year. I know something that very heavily influenced the town manager's decisions for her rankings was the select board strategic plan. I think that was probably her and our biggest frame of reference for when we were ranking these, is how do these projects fit into the strategic plan. So if that's something, I don't know if that's something you want to consider as a committee, just so that you know.
Could do that.
We're
I mean, the
going off
department head should already be doing that though, right?
That's why, yeah, they're bringing in projects
Yeah,
that kind of fit underneath that already.
yeah.
Talking to some of them, over this last year.
Yes. And I think it is moving in that direction. I think the last couple of years with the strategic plan still being developed and getting department heads kind of used to that,
Yeah.
that wasn't always the case, but that was largely what informed where our rankings come from. So I think that's where a lot of the low priority items came from us, was this doesn't really fit anything that the select board is looking to do. So
And we don't know that.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So this is good
Yeah.
conversation. I get it now.
So part of the evolution, two things on that. I believe that I agree with your comments, Rebecca. I think that it's important that we also get clarification within. There's guidelines and then there's practices, and we can document what the practices are and what the guidelines are. So we're really accomplishing two things.
Yeah.
You can look at them, you understand how to use them, and at the same, under the guidelines and with respect to how they're utilized, the practices, we're communicating in a paragraph how the town administrator, including finance department, processes the Rory, how we process them, or at least what our intention should be for processing them. Not how you actually fill them in, but how we use them and
Right.
why. Which brings me to the next point, which I think is really important. One of the primary goals, one of many goals, I should say, with the Rory, by including strategic and master plans, is that as the select board and others, the master plan, which I think this time around, we've all
Yeah.
learned something, will be more of an
Yeah.
action plan.
Yeah.
As those become more ingrained and more utilized, like the the plan that you've been working on, forgive me, I don't recall the name of it, but the strategic plan for our town's IT, all of those will start to, they should, if the Rory works the way it's been envisioned, we'll do a re-ranking, and strategic plans will be like one of the highest point getters. So the idea is that it changes the culture, because then it goes back to the department heads, and the department heads see, oh, well, if this fits the strategic plan, then I'm more likely than not going to have a higher ranking towards a recommendation, and not just with the Capcom, but with the select board and the finance committee. So the idea is that as we're maturing and developing as a community that utilizes these plans, and not just draws them up as we've always done, but actually does more of them and makes them action plans, is that the Rory will reinforce that, and they will reinforce the rankings. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's important. And that's why I think over time, as we mature with our process and that part of it matures, the Rory will become more important and more successful.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah, this is really good. 'Cause I'm sorry I keep interrupting. And
No, please,
I keep getting
I-
more ideas.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? 'Cause I'm really trying to think of if we have an hour with water company, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we have an hour. They come in, they sit down. We, and me included, I think needs to do a better job of being prepared. So we come down. This is just one scenario. You say, does anybody have any questions on any of the projects? There's no 30 minutes of them
Yep.
presenting this and this. We're obviously going to talk and ask questions about the big
Sure.
projects, and we ask questions, and then we kind of have our informed discussion within that
Yeah.
versus like Richard and I wanting that 15 minutes at the end to talk like, what did you think? What did you think? We can almost do it there. The problem with that is bigger projects. You almost want people who are watching to get a little bit of
Right.
background.
So you're sort of saying some stuff's consent with a small explanation, and the rest of it's big.
If we don't do our work,
Yeah.
we shouldn't be on Capcom. So
Yeah.
we need to flip through it and like, all right, I got a lot of questions on this one. I read through this, I got questions on here. And then
Yeah.
we've got Mark, we use the water company example, and then this is what we go after. Then our facilitator is keeping us on time, and then we feel like we kind of heard from everybody. But it's just our questions versus them sometimes talking for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Steve-
thinking they have to and they don't.
Right.
When we need to save it for when they really do.
Maybe they won't like that because they
Yeah.
feel like they want their project to go forward, so they want to talk about
Right.
it.
But it's gonna if it's not. If
Right.
It's a no-brainer one.
And you
know
could
what I
always
mean?
leave time in. Is there anything else that we missed that you want us to know?
Yeah.
And then they could say, well, you're right.
Like that L8 feeder thing was a good example. What I'm really psyched about this is everybody's finally working together. They're gonna dig the street up. We're gonna fix everything that's broken.
Yeah,
Well,
I think we've got
This
there.
is a huge thing
But
to
no.
do that.
No. That
What? What do you mean?
we're segueing off. So
No,
this is one
I'm
thing.
just using an example
but so this is-
of like if that was in front of us.
No. Well, let me.
It's like that's the kind of thing that needs to have more conversation than some other stuff does. That's all I'm talking
Yes,
about.
and I'm
all I'm saying.
committing the wrongness here by saying the information I've been getting is that the L8 project is all going to be above grade and nothing underground.
I don't even know.
Okay,
I just-
yeah.
So-
I just-
That was
So just to your
well,
comment,
I mean, I
that
didn't know
was the
I think
position.
that was something that was.
after our meeting last year. I
Right.
mean, our last meeting.
Right.
It wasn't on the.
Right.
so I just correcting
Did you read Hillary
information.
Rayport's email
Yeah, there's a
about it?
thing on there's
Right.
a presentation on the 26th or the 24th, and they're going to be presenting
it's 26th,
only the
Wednesday.
above ground aspect, nothing below ground.
Can I ask a quick question too?
Yeah, please.
If you just, what do you think Brian and Libby would say the departments would feel about my suggestion of don't need to present anything, we have questions for you, or we don't?
I don't necessarily know what I think Brian or Libby would think. I think the department heads would probably be okay with that.
I think they're going to be psyched.
Because I think it takes a little bit of pressure off of them, and I mean, chime in if you disagree with me.
Because they still have to know every
Yeah, and
your stuff.
My thought is that hopefully moving forward with this new system and the database that we're going to be using, sort of like we've talked about briefly, theoretically their project won't really be able to go anywhere if they haven't already submitted all of the information they need to go along with it. So to your point, you guys should have all of the information that you could possibly need to consider and discuss a project, which would eliminate that discussion period, because instead of them coming in with a partly filled out form and nothing else, and you have to use the meeting time for them to really explain what this is, where their numbers came from, what they're thinking of, you'll already have been able to read it. So I guess that's sort of a roundabout way of answering your question. I think for the most part, everybody would be on board with that, because again, we should have had it already as town administration, because it's supposed to come to us first to review. So I
think our question shouldn't be
what is this?
This is missing. What was this number was missing? Let's assume we have all the information.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to think of a more efficient way that we can discuss.
Right,
and not
really dig
leave.
into it and versus
Yeah.
actually just getting an overview of what it is.
Well, and not even just, yes, and also, I think to Jason's point, the idea is simply, we're asking them, they presented us with a full packet of information based on what it is we need, because
Yeah.
we've established what it is we need in the database. They've completely filled it out. We have the opportunity to just ask them questions if we have any. We may not on any number of projects because all the information we wanted is there. So basically, they're clarifying information. Nat, I think your comment with respect to differentiating along the lines of consent lines, I think the consent concept is a good one, and it probably will fall into what Jason's comment was, which is, some of the bigger projects really need more attention and need airtime.
Yeah.
But the smaller projects, because we have the information in the database, and if we're doing our prep work properly individually for the committee, a lot of small projects are going to fall, or a lot of simple projects, even if they're large dollar amounts, are going to fall into that consent. So one, I think it's wonderful for efficiency and effectiveness. The big thing is, as you said, and as I mentioned last season, and the reason we didn't do it that way last season is we have to be prepared. Now, this isn't just on us as members of the committee, it's on the process. Part of the process wasn't in place without the database to have all the information submitted. That's been addressed. The next part of it is, I think, a really important part of this component is going to be scheduling with an eye on when is it realistic for a particular department head to get their information in, because ultimately we cannot be getting packets 2 days before a meeting and be prepared. We should be getting our packets a minimum of a week before.
Yeah, I agree there. There's
I agree.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can do it within 48 hours, and other times it's not going to happen.
It's hard to ask of a volunteer board, especially if you're volunteering for other things or you have a life. I mean, we all have a life with the capital L.
So
I just want to be clear, I'm not suggesting this is a reflection on staff. It's a reflection on the information hasn't necessarily been available because the process hasn't matured. But we're getting closer, and I think we can be getting to the point where the suggestion you've made, which is we come prepared. It requires we get our packet a week ahead of time. In order to get our packet a week ahead of time, it requires we do proper scheduling so we're not jumping people around because the departments around because they didn't bring their info in.
Yeah.
So I think that would be helpful.
As of right now, the deadline that we've discussed for departments to submit to finance and town admin is July 23rd.
Okay.
We have a meeting next week with the town manager to sort of firm that up. So presumably, or that week, we should be able to assess what we have from who and let you guys know, here's who's ready.
So would you mind?
But I don't know if you would want to set something before that or wait to set department presentation dates until then.
And that's why I didn't get into scheduling in terms of presenting something to you guys yet. I know we've said the concept of maybe leaving blanks, fields to fill with departments. But one of the things I wanted to suggest, and if you could convey to Libby if you guys speak to her, because I know she's busy with stuff, is that concept of maybe there's departments, and it's not like it's going to be this way every year for every department, other than the general concept. And the general concept is some departments have fewer requests, some departments have small dollar requests that are simple. Some departments have planned out years in advance and they just need to update. If we front load our schedule with those departments and give them dates relative to, say, the late July date as a deadline, but then departments who we're not going to get to until September or October who need the time might have more time.
Yeah.
But one, only if it works, because I understand you guys can't be chasing people around. But if they understand there's a strict adherence to that deadline, it's not you get until mid-September because you're a large department with multiple requests versus a smaller department with fewer requests or a department that generally has simpler requests. These are your dates that get established every year based upon what's in the SIP, because it's not just department based, it's what's in your SIP. And the reason I mentioned the SIP, guys, is because the SIP with a C, or capital improvement plan, is we want them to be getting those projects in, obviously, so we're aware of them in advance, but that also gives them an opportunity to do a lot of that planning during a downtime, if they ever have any. Put it into the system, and it's there, and it just needs to be updated a little bit. And then it helps us to plan the schedule accurately, and then it helps us to be informed because we get our packets on time. The whole thing is supposed to work a certain way, like you all know. I'm just trying to articulate some of those concepts, so when you speak to Libby, if I don't, it's out there.
So just to clarify, you're saying departments that are simpler, shall we say, give them that July 23rd deadline, and then perhaps a department that is a little more
Sewer,
overloaded,
transportation.
whatever, give them a later deadline overall, or a later deadline for you guys, or?
I think I think what I'd suggest is, and again, that it's not the deadline that they have every year. It's based
Right.
on their capital
their
request
outlook.
load.
Yeah, yep,
So it'll be a load-based
Yep.
schedule.
okay,
And then the caveat would be that it's also how prepared is the department. So for instance, by nature of the beast, the airport is a more mature department. It has federal regulations, it's got long-term planning. The airport is probably one of those quote-unquote larger department dollar numbers, load-wise, that's prepared, and they could come in earlier than maybe sewer, because David's still developing the whole
Airport's probably ready
program.
now.
Right. So that's what I'm asking we consider is what's their load and what's their level of preparation.
Right.
And we do it as a trial basis this year, if it works for you guys to have staggered dates.
yeah,
Because the other thing is, I think it might be helpful for staff and for town admin is you don't have to sit down and review every single department by July 23rd. You can review them over a staggered basis, but it's only gonna work again if they stick to their dates. Does that help?
yes.
Yeah, when we send out, I mean, this is operating budget, but in a similar manner, we send out those requests in a staggered way. Like, we're not gonna hold all of the meetings on the same day when the departments come in and try to present their operating
Oh, yeah.
budget.
Yeah.
So it's staggered, so we do like a few enterprises, like they need to report back earlier because their meetings are gonna be scheduled first. Then a few more enterprises need to get their dates back a week later, their budgets back a week later. When it's staggered, it's easier for us to control because we're not getting 12 different capital plans back at one time, and it's more manageable in the schedule because it's like they were just due and now the following week they're gonna present. And then everyone is kind of, while bigger departments have a later deadline, everyone's still under the same understanding. This is my due date, I'm expected to present the following week. It just kind of streamlines it so everyone's on the same page. It's
Yeah.
definitely a lot easier to manage, that's for sure.
I'm thinking, good, okay. That's what I was thinking, and I understand there's components that become more intensive, like managing the schedule
Right.
becomes a little bit of a project itself, but the end result is the workload decreases because it's more efficient and effective.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we
There's
can-
caveats to it, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
So-
we can present that. I don't want to speak for the town manager. She may
Right.
just say, I want to hold fast to this deadline and that's it. But we can certainly discuss it with her and see what
Okay.
her thoughts are, and we'll let you know.
And if there's an opportunity, if that becomes the case, for me as the chair to express our information as opposed to our position, let me know, let her know that I'm
Yeah.
happy to
Sure.
talk for a few minutes and just try and help understand our reasoning there, because it's very logical and rational to me. Are you guys on board with that? If it works for the administration and staff, I'm not, we're not trying to carve out a position here, but I mean, is there something I'm missing and we're missing in this
I
discussion on
want them
schedule?
to do whatever's easiest
Yeah.
for them, for us to get
stuff.
What we
packets
need.
4 or 5 days
Yeah.
before,
Okay.
or
I think it-
minimum of 3. You guys handle it however
Yeah.
is.
I think honestly it ends up being a little more work upfront with the schedule, but significantly less work throughout the whole process, because it was, last capital cycle, it was like, who's not ready? Now their meeting's getting changed. This person's gonna come in instead.
Right.
It was so much
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
forth. Versus,
Just.
I gave up
yeah.
updating the schedule in November because it kept changing, and
Yeah.
and it's just like there's too much other stuff that's a
Yeah.
higher priority with capital stuff than to be focusing on schedule. So, okay, I think we've sussed that out pretty well.
One thing I was just
Yeah, please.
thinking, when my first year on the select board, this happened twice my first year. I asked a question and it was, that's in the packet. And so I learned pretty quick that I got to come really prepared.
Right.
And if we have that culture here, not in a nasty way,
No.
if it's something basic, if it's,
How much is it?
so we don't have to go over and over and over. Yeah, it could be like, where is that in the packet? But just,
Yeah.
if we start seeing that over and over again, and I put myself, there's times where I didn't look at the packet last year and came in, but I didn't ask anything because I knew I wasn't prepared. So that's one thing, and then on the just remind me on this, bigger things like an $18 million ask for a facility or something like that. Do we have cover sheets kind of reminding us what we did last year, where this is, or is that what the kind of interview's for?
That is going to be, okay, so one of the benefits of the database is that we will be able to create and generate those reports on the fly for a particular project with respect to any expense that was related to it in the past, and not only what was approved, but what's been expended. Is that your?
That's not a bad idea though. Just even like a summary of this was
just
presented for FY20. It was moved out. It's kind of like that's something that Ali and I can work on. Just like a little.
Yeah, even maybe here's why, or here's I
Right.
don't know. We had money for design in 2017 because sometimes you get a big 50-page packet and you can flip through it, but it's just so heavy. But just for the bigger stuff, I'm very, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to create any more work.
Right, if it's not
No,
too
I
much
think
work,
that's
to be
not
honest.
a bad idea.
You already have a terrific document. It's the
Yeah.
one that you put out. It's called the Capcom Summary of Fiscal Year 21 Request. It goes by department, and it gives, prior funding. It gives
Right.
the outlook for the next 5 years. It gives Rory information.
But you're referring more to something that would be like a re-ask, so something that was presented in a prior year and was pushed out, and it's now being brought
I just
back.
think anything really big.
Yeah.
So can I jump in?
Yep.
So, because I think one of the way, just really familiar with the kind of the structure and the framework of all this stuff, is that we actually could be, in the database, we could and we really should be integrating fields for re-asks, and which we do, just bear with me, re-ask large projects. We have the explanation, and we have the summary, and then we have more detailed information field. We could supplement that with along the lines of an update on what the expense, what portion is a re-ask, what portion was. So it's like we get, I think one of the things I think you're talking about is, we use a specific example is, let's say Surfside Road, Okra, like that is like a spaghetti thing in my mind even. Something that is an explanation, so we've got another field that isn't a summary of the project in terms of the name of the project or an explanation of the actual work, but it gets into explaining how it relates to previous work and why something that may have been requested wasn't done and where the money was used instead. And it could be, it should be, I would suggest that if we add the field, which I think we should, there should be one, and I know Brian and I have talked about this, and there actually is one for finance and one for the town administrator. So then what happens is the department head, because it's not relevant to their sitting down and filling out the paperwork, has their comments in that regard. The finance department is going to have a different perspective based on bonds or other lending instruments or something, and they get a chance to put in theirs, and the town administrator is going to have her perspective based on strategic plans, or the town admin's and manager's perspective on capacity. So it gives us an opportunity, if we have a report, what will happen is we pull up the SIP request form on our computer. We probably won't even need packets eventually. You'll be able to pull it up and review it, and you'll be able to see all three fields. And they don't have to be tomes, they don't have to be chapters, they don't have to be books, but it could go a long way in addressing being better informed generally as members of the commission before we come in. Sorry to make that a long thing, but I think it's an important thing that we have, an important aspect to the repository, that all three, department head, finance department, and town manager, have a field like that, which is explanatory update. Does that resonate with you guys at all?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the outcomes. The outcome is we have a good discussion, we're really informed, and it doesn't add on 80 more hours to the finance department.
Yeah.
Right, and all the departments.
Or the Capcom.
Like how do we stay on time and be really informed?
Yeah.
And so anytime somebody asks us, we're like, oh, this.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I think this is a great discussion. The only other thing I would suggest, guys, is we should have a field for, I know we have a field for, I'll talk to Brian about this. Because Capcom, you guys should have an opportunity to have a field when you log in that your information pulls up. So you can be making comments, notes for yourself. You sit on your laptop, it's a Saturday afternoon, we get our packet on a Wednesday, you reviewed it, you've thought about it, you log back in and you can put in some comments. You don't have to write it all down or print it all up. So there's an opportunity for us to be using the technology to make it a little bit easier for us. And then later on you go in and the question's been asked, you can delete it. Or you can just take the text out, or you can update it. And then we also can be creating it's really simple to be creating a report for each of you that you'll be able to print a list of outstanding items or questions you have. So we get to the end of the season and there's something you forgot about, but it was important for you personally to understand and know. It's just a report. You don't have to go fishing through the data. So that is really stuff that's going to, part of this, some of this stuff I think is really good discussion. Some of it's going to be a maturation process as we get the database going.
One of the things for me that I try to judge if I understand something is if I walk out of Capcom and I can go to my baristas at 11:30 when it's slow and I can explain to them the 5 projects we talked about in a really easy layman's term way. I do that on the select board all the time. And if I can't do that with them for select board issues, then I don't know it well enough. Mm-hmm. Just a little thing that I kind of measure if I understand something or not, which allows me to talk to the public and anybody else who ever asks.
Acknowledging, though, that you are artful in that capacity. That's a skill. That's a skill set for people. I haven't developed that. I don't have my
in that. Thank you, but that's
no. But you are. I mean, you're able to kind of encapsulate things in a very brief statement, and you know, it may not cover all the bases, but it articulates the thrust of the point.
Yeah.
And it simplifies it for people in a way that's important. I mean, you were the town information outreach person, so I mean, you have a skill set with that.
I just think that's one of my standards if I understand something.
Right.
I'm not saying
good
we all
standard.
have to walk away with that.
It's 2.5.
Well, I think that's important, and that's something that we can bring up when we talk about, like, what's our common goal for the season, for the budget season. And one of them is to be able to walk out and articulate, you know, fairly accurately, but in short, what a project is about, and maybe what some of the issues are, or what some of the benefits are.
Right.
And if we all have that, you know, if we all have that common understanding that it's a goal, then we can all work towards it. So I think that that's beneficial, and I'd ask you to keep that in mind when we get to that point. I'm going to move us along to, so where this segues is to just we talked about the Rory and the database and how that kind of relates to the FY20 process. I'm not going to ask you now, but does anyone have other comments on last year's process that they'd like to make? Or I can close that out.
Not that I've already brought up my stuff.
I wouldn't say the process, but I do think that looking at individual people's Rorys and ours with the towns as well, I think that we need to work on consistency in how we interpret the different criteria that make up the Rory for each project. I think people interpret different, you know, I'm trying to think of what they all are individually, but efficiencies, or whether or not strategic plan, or whether or not it reduces, you know, O&E costs, or, you know, some of them are a little bit more vague than the others. And I think looking at the range of some of our individuals relative to other members, you know, some are 0 and some are 100. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's got to be some misinterpretation by either one person or both people. And I guess we never really went through and, you know, kind of discussed how we each interpret each one of those criteria. And it might
outside
not
of any specific project. Just
outside of any specific project, just in general, just the you know, the underlying kind of general nature of what each of those criteria are relative to any project. Because they're all kind of vague. They could all apply to different projects differently. And again, I mean, if you look at, you know, one project in each of our 6 individual Rory forms, and then you line up, you know, what everyone voted, I mean, there's a pretty wide range. Everyone, there's probably at least 75% swing from the highest to the lowest.
So part of that, I think I understand what you're saying, and I think part of that can be covered in the guidelines portion,
Perhaps.
and part of it would be covered under the practices portion, but they would both be the Rory. So it's, how do you fill it out how do you apply, what is our common understanding of the definition of what this means?
Exactly. I think it's the interpretation of that.
Right.
Because we all have kind of developed our own interpretation without discussing amongst the group what that interpretation loosely should be.
Right, and then I totally agree with you there, and I still think there's going to be a deviation, but that's the beauty of the Rory, is it allows people to input their own. Somebody may just not like, an extra set of blue widgets, so they just say no, and someone really likes blue. I don't know anyone like that. And they're going to vote 100% for blue. But if we understand a big part of the deviation, I agree with you, may be, and even if it's not a big part of the deviation, it's important. We have a common understanding of what this means. What does a scheduled replacement mean?
Right. Something like that. Exactly. Like, it could be,
Not
is
to
it,
get-
again, scheduled replacement like an ambulance every 5 years, or is it scheduled replacement like, well, we have to reshingle, a building because it hasn't been shingled
Right.
in the last 20.
Right.
Not that we were scheduling it, and
Right.
I think that's a generalization, but I think it applies to each criteria.
I
No,
think
in its own way.
that also
Makes sense.
directly relates back to
Town
some
managers
of the
and
struggles
strategic
we've
plan.
had internally as well, because I think perhaps even amongst us, sometimes we interpret them differently, and then how we're interpreting them clearly somewhere is very different from how you guys as a committee are
Agreed.
interpreting them. So
Yeah.
I think that's a very valid point.
I
I mean, there's some that are really easy, decreases energy use. Good, we're good with that one.
Right.
But there are some that are they're more difficult to. The concept could be have a variable meanings, and we need to establish or at least have discussions about those. Again, I want to caution you guys. I think this is a great discussion. There's some of this and some of these topics, and to some degree, I don't know how much of this we're going to get done before we start the budgeting season. I'm going to make notes and I'm going to try and pursue them, but we have a resources issue with capital, and the town is addressing it. They're going to go find someone, and there's going to be somebody dedicated to doing this type of stuff, because it's important to get the program on a level, a solid foundation. And I don't mean a more mature foundation, I guess I'm saying. So I just want to caution you, I'm not trying to be a wet towel, but some of this stuff gets involved with, we could have hours of discussion over scheduled replacement. And I'm not looking at Nat because it's his fault, but I'm looking at him because, he brings up good points about the differences in it. And I know Christie has different opinion on it. So some things we're gonna get to, and some things we're not gonna get to as much as it would be great to do. But my goal will be to try and prioritize those things. And please, I'm saying this stuff for a reason. If we don't get to something we talk about and it's a great idea, or we don't get into it in as much depth as you'd like, then let me know. That's what I'm here to do. But I just want to be clear on that point.
I'm not looking at any work. I want to make it more efficient, our meetings more efficient.
Sure.
And if we have to add one meeting so we all understand the definitions,
Yep.
short-term pain, but long-term
Okay.
smoothness gain, yeah.
No, that's good, and that's why I'm looking, that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, so I can get feedback from you guys. So I know, well, hey, look, we don't mind meeting a couple more meetings to talk about just this stuff. That's important for me to know when I'm sitting down to do the schedule, so.
Right. We
thank
also
you.
might find that having some basic paragraph definition of each of those,
Yeah.
when 3 new people come into Capcom.
That's what made me start thinking about it when you
Who's
mentioned
gonna
that
put all
before.
this together?
Well, that's what I'm talking about. So I'm saying that these are good. I'm agreeing with you. When I say guidelines and practices, I'm talking about those paragraphs. I'm talking about how we use them. What's our common definition? Even if someone strays off it, we have a common definition, and we know how to use it in the sheet, and we know how to apply it to different projects. But I'm also saying there's got to be someone who does that.
Yeah.
And some of it it'll be convention. It'll be we sit here and we discuss it, and then I'll make notes on definitions, and it will directly be put into a log to be doing this work. And some of it will be things that we may not get to right away, or we don't do just thoroughly yet. But if we're going to have a couple meetings and we break it up and say, hey, let's talk about all the definitions, and Peter volunteered to, I'm not suggesting you did, but maybe you will. Peter's going to write down the definitions, and we're going to suss these out. And if it takes 2 meetings, it takes 2 meetings. And then they're written out, and they can be put in, it doesn't matter. The format doesn't matter. Just something that's accessible to us individually through our logins You can click on guidelines, you can click on practices. We can do it ourselves, and then we can have another meeting with town admin and finance, or we could do it all together. I think it'd probably be better all together, but there's utility in doing it as Capcom. So let's, as opposed to just talking about it, do we want to have a meeting to go through the Rory and how it's used and what the definitions are, and try to suss out a little bit of the guidelines and practices?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that'd be a great kind of refresher. I also, I mean, that brings me to another just small point. When it came to the deciding criteria for what we accept and what we don't, I think it would be helpful to go back through last year's, at least a sample of them, and said, all right, this is an example of one that was right above the median average, you know, but or the aggregate mean that we picked or that we
Right.
didn't pick, and see whether, you know, how well some of those worked last year, and if that triggers any, you know, any good ideas about how we should establish that guideline. Because when you think about it just abstractly right now without having anything down in front of us, and relative to town admins too, when we were trying to line those up and say, you guys were at 27, we were at 56, we were over, you guys were
Right.
under, did we approve it, did we not, did it just come down to, did we disregard the Rory, you know, the aggregate means altogether?
Right.
And just say yes or no. And just looping back to one quick thing, I do think that last year and for previous years, I've gotten the most kind of information out of the questions that we asked department heads. So I think reinforcing, you know, what you said and what you started, that if we go in and don't necessarily have them give us a 10-minute spiel, but we are able to ask questions, you know, I feel like that's where you get the most out of it. Even if you're unprepared and you hear other people asking good questions, that kind of leads into further discussion. That for me has been the most valuable. So I think whether they come in and say anything about it ahead of time, or they run through a list and just say any questions on this or that, or we call out ones we have questions for, like town meeting, I think that's a good development and kind of a good way to steer our process.
Okay.
So I do back that up.
And I agree with that. Go ahead, Richard.
I would, just going back to a future meeting where we're going to discuss the Rorys and the methodology, it would be really helpful for me, and this might be very simplistic. Let's take a project,
Example.
put it
Talk
up
through
on
it.
the board, you know, and let's go through it and say, okay, if I'm 100% for that, I really want this project, and let's take it step by step, so that we can all see how that feeling that I'm 100% for this project gets woven through the Rorys.
Yeah, and I think it might be useful, maybe we would have 3 examples.
Yeah, I do think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Definitely, because
Yeah.
I think it's good. It'd be good to have a discussion and say, all right, so like, how do we all interpret? Does this improve energy efficiency based on this project? And somebody might say, well, that car has better gas mileage, so it's 100%.
Right.
And somebody might say, well, but I interpret it as, does it save us electricity, and do these windows, you know, make it more, this building more efficient?
Bet you could come up with 3 good
Yeah.
examples that are very
All over the
different.
board.
$300,000 piece of equipment.
Yeah.
$6 million project and something else.
Something
and then
easy,
go through
you
it
know,
all.
new scubas for the fire department.
So Richard, I'm gonna actually ask you and Peter to get together.
Peter McKeckern, right?
Peter Kaiser, not physically. This is what I'm gonna ask you very simply. Pick 3 projects. And pick 3 projects. And then talk to each other and see if you can resolve that down to 3 projects.
Sure.
And then we'll use those
You
as
pick
our
3
examples. No, but I mean,
I know, I'm
it's
just
good because you have a
Yeah,
real,
no, I know.
you have a different perspective than Richard does on them, and it's not that it's like 180 degrees, but including on the Rory. So your concerns about the Rory are a little bit different than yours. So I think it would be helpful if the 2 of you got together. And again, you don't have to just look through the list.
Yeah.
And
we'll do that.
Last year's list?
last year's Rory list.
Yep.
Can you email them a copy of the final Rory results?
Yeah, that'd be great. And then, so we each pick 3, and then we whittle that down to 3 between the 2 of us?
Yeah, I would say pick 3 and then
And then
send
we-
them to each
those
other.
will be
And then say, oh, well, rank them 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yours are, pick 3 and rank them.
I mean, you could probably take your actual Rory scores and my Rory scores from 3
Right.
things, then we could put them side by side and say,
Sure.
all right, why did we each rank these so differently?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I want to be clear. What I'm suggesting is you guys do the work to pick 3 projects that we are going to
That
review as
we're
a
all gonna
group.
use. Okay, all right.
And that sells me having to figure out 3 that 2 of you picking projects is going to be more meaningful than me selecting them.
Okay,
So if you guys could come up with 3,
Sure.
probably.
and then we'll
By when?
what's today? Thursday?
Dartboard.
We
mean-
can send you that list tomorrow?
I would say, you know,
Sure.
When's our next meeting?
Wednesday next week, and then or let's say Thursday next week. We're gonna schedule a meeting probably for, I'll have to get back to you guys on when we're gonna have the meeting. But it would be helpful for you guys to do it sooner rather than later, because then we can have we can ask staff to help us put together those projects in PDFs, so we can put them up on the board. It just gives us more time, that's all.
Yeah, okay.
So the sooner you can do it, the better.
After.
But it doesn't have to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for that. That's very helpful. Any other comments on FY20 and how that can inform FY21 at this point? We're not closing off that discussion, but we're closing it off for the moment if there's no other. Okay.
Oh, just a
Yep.
question for our purposes. Are you guys still planning on meeting on Thursdays?
No.
And at what time?
Wow, that was strong.
That's really funny because
That
I do
was
that to
strong.
people all the time.
I love Thursday. What do you got? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Yes.
As long as it's
And
not
then at
Wednesday morning at 8
10?
o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the 10.
I think the 10 works.
Okay, we just want to start working on preliminarily figuring out where there are rooms available, because Ally's already started looking
There we
for
go.
FinCom and there's almost nothing.
I think if we keep our time and our day and our time, we'll be able to get this room.
Yeah, this one at least.
Yeah. And I
Do
think
you guys want to stay in this room?
We don't mind it here.
I don't mind. I think
Yeah,
I think there's going to be certain. Obviously, there'll be certain types of topics where
The only issue here is the lunch thing. The smell coming through the door.
It drives you nuts.
The
doesn't it?
bacon.
Brutal.
It's breakfast. It's
I
bacon.
know they like.
Or public
they got the
comment,
whole
but
pack.
we don't
I
do much
love
of
that
that.
bacon. I want to get in there and eat it.
Maybe I'm super naive. If we did meet in a bigger room, would people come?
No,
Okay.
Well, I mean, we usually meet in the.
No, but
no. Planning commission, we have one person shows up.
yeah, for
Very long
me,
ago.
it's not.
That's it.
For me, it's not so much the ceremony of it, having the larger room, the community room,
Yeah.
but there is a formality, and I
Yeah.
think there are certain reviews and projects that we do want to have that, because it may be like we have a department and they come in and they just do a bunch of consent stuff, but we may have a department that comes in and talks about big projects, and hopefully
and if
we're.
Weston and Sampson or somebody like that consultant from our finance coming, we gotta try to move to
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Well, and along those lines
Well,
is that
yeah.
I'm hoping that as we're getting into the database, we're gonna also be using the big screen more. And at that point, we'll have them on our little screens. But, I mean, the idea is that we're trying to get people involved from the community. It can be posted. The camera could be focused on the screen if there's a big project.
Yep.
Not suggesting everything, but I've just simply said, let's have some flexibility when we look at the schedule. But I think for the most part, we should be here. Anyone have a
And
concern
also,
about
we
that?
can,
Is that a big screen?
The problem here is that the camera's over there, or I thought there was.
Yeah, but even with if we do the community room, there's nobody in the
Oh, who
control
does
center
it?
switching it, so
It
it's
might not make a
irrelevant.
difference.
We're
Okay.
not- the
and we
community-
have two
You
FG.
could see the screen
if we had to
though.
have it.
I watched back the sewer master plan meeting, and you could see it from the way they film it in the community room.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not.
It's not.
It's
Anybody
not
who's
a-
really into it will have the packet
Yeah,
with
they
them
can
on their
download.
Okay.
computer when they're
That-
watching
That's
it.
good information. That's important. So if we can get this room, I think primarily it's important. There are going to be some departments like the school department, if they bring 3 people and or when the senior center came
Yeah,
in
that's
and
what I was
there's
thinking.
there's like
This room is
5
not
or
good,
there's
yeah.
5 people who want to present in the group, and then there's 5 more people who want to be there. There's no sense cramming in here if that other
Our hope
space
is just to
available.
at least sort of tentatively start looking, and then we can sort of suss things out and always move around. But we just wanted to try to get some things lined up because rooms
We
are
haven't
booking up
even
really fast.
Big on FinCom scheduling it, and I already have like most of our rooms booked preliminarily, like, just because
Yeah.
Just to get something.
the
on
Girl
the board.
Scouts have really.
So all the more reason to try and stick to our day and time,
Yeah.
because they're used to us here. Which the other thing I'm going to ask you guys, and this sounds silly, but I just want to ask, out of respect to, want to comment. Well, I'll mention it later. So the other thing I just wanted to touch on before we close out is this idea of the common goal of walking out of here with a encapsulated version of what a project is. That is, why it's important, what the concerns are, and, whatever the related topics are, but you can easily convey. I think it's going to be important for us to develop that skill as a committee by individually working on it on particular projects, because it's going to relate to the green sheet. And I bring this up because the green sheet is a concept that we've come up with where we're trying to help integrate what other committees like the finance committee or boards, the select board, know about from our meetings by putting information in their packet. So that will be a really good skill to be able to have just like a one sentence thing on important projects. It's not going to be a summary of every project, but it's going to be things, what I'm hoping to do, if I remember, is, well, we're going to do this, is we're going to put the green sheet as going to be an agenda item. And then the idea will be that we have 5 minutes to discuss the green sheet and what we as a committee feel should be on it, because we feel it's important for the select board to know, or we feel it's important for the FinCom to know. But it's also going to be for the liaison to say, I think it's important for them to know about this. And the reason we're going to do it in a group meeting is, one, it's just more efficient for the group, but it's also more efficient for Ally, I think, who's kind of spearheading this, to be able to write it down and put it into the green sheet so that it can just programmatically be sent out for those respective public bodies' packets. So it's more, I'm more discussing the procedural nature of how we'll be addressing the green sheet in our meetings, not necessarily, and some of the general idea on content, which we're working on. Ally did a draft, and we're going to be working on. The idea of the green sheet is basically is what we just said. It's going to be information for those respective public bodies, and hopefully it will help integrate our planning, or at least reconcile what we're doing with what they're doing, and if there's issues, they come up earlier. Other than that, does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns?
No, this is really good.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Good. I'm thinking early, definitely early, we want to get the Rory stuff squared away sooner rather than later.
So tell me when the next meeting is.
Well, we're gonna,
Thursday.
No, well.
Wednesday at 10.
Got, whatchamacallit, the next Thursday,
okay,
check that.
right, so the last thing I want to touch on, will you guys,
Senior center thing.
why don't you guys look at your schedules? What time is that?
Oh, I gotta look at it, I got.
We got the
sent
SIP
something.
thing next week too, or the 24th. I just want to give you guys the rundown on the SIP. So this is SIP with an S, which was, one of our recommendations was strategic integrational planning sessions. And I'll be forwarding this to Libby and Brian, and I want to get you guys input too. The idea is that the role, the goal, the focus of that group, that 2-member each board group, is that we're integrating efforts to reconcile and achieve current fiscal year recommendations and near future and longer range plans. So we're trying to integrate our efforts to reconcile all those things based on community needs and values, including strategic and other formal plans. So again, the strategic plans are a big focus. So they start to get into the culture. So this little group is also thinking about how to do that. You're working on your strategic plans. The NPDDC is going to be working on those. You guys will probably be talking at some point.
27th at 4 is our senior.
Okay. So last part of that is with an eye on consistency, transparency, and integrity, and with an eye on appropriate frugalness, is that this group will be getting together, is going to be my suggestion based upon the Capcom's FY20 report and recommendations, the concept that we put in there, to kind of accomplish that goal. And it's not that we're lifting all that weight. It's just that we're giving feedback to our. It's kind of like that group has its own liaisons to the respective, the select board, to the FinCom, to the Capcom, so that we're trying to do some integrate. We're trying to integrate our planning and come up with ways to accomplish. We want to reconcile each 3 groups' current fiscal year recommendations and near future and longer range plans, so that the left hand and the right hand know what they're doing. So the way you would say it is, it's a meeting for the left hand and the right hand to know what it's doing. The way I said it is a lot longer, so I'll work on that. The date of the next meeting is, what did you say you can't do now?
27th is 4 o'clock for the senior center. So next Thursday?
That's
or-
2 weeks from today.
That's 2 weeks, yeah.
I don't know, do you guys want to meet on the 20th and see if we can get a bunch of it done next Thursday? Libby won't be able to be here. Jason,
Can't
I
do
don't think you
20th.
can do the 20th from the last meeting we talked about. Okay, so this is the only thing is that we're getting into, well, wait, we're not going to really start in earnest until August.
Right.
So we could do, what do you guys think about the 11th and the 18th?
July?
Yep.
Which may also be good because by then too, we may have an idea of who's already been submitting things
Yeah.
to us. So that could be a good chance for us
Yeah.
to update you as well and just say,
Either
just so
of
you
those.
know.
And if any of us, like, I gotta get reappointed, I'm gonna ask to be. Who's on what, where, from where? So
I'm still select
you're
board
gonna
here.
get on there. You're just somebody,
You're in private nonprofits.
right?
Yeah.
okay?
At large.
You're at large, so you get appointed by the select board, right?
But he's
How
on
does that
for, you were
I was
reappointed
already
last year?
reappointed
Oh,
last year,
okay, okay.
Whose term is coming
I
up?
don't even know how it works.
Yours?
It's every year for the
Yours.
planning commission. It's every
I don't
year.
know.
Well, you have to have.
No,
a
it's on the
representative
agenda next
every year.
Monday,
Oh, okay.
my appointment. So
Yeah, right.
it goes every year. It's just a,
Well, back to it, I like the 11th. There's a waste summit from 6 to 8. And so if we do this from 4 to 5:30 or whatever.
I was hoping we could do our Thursdays at 10.
Okay.
If you guys are good with
Oh,
I have executive session at
Aye.
9. So that,
Okay.
depending on what's there, it could go to 10 or 11. What's in it?
it. I mean, 11, can you do the 11 on the 11th?
sure.
Can you guys?
I
Do
guess.
whatever you.
All right,
I'll
so,
make something work.
and then the 18th, I would like to schedule for either the same time or our 10 o'clock, because I have a feeling it's going to be a 2-meeting process, or there'll be other topics, and we can always cancel the meeting. But if
Yeah.
we don't have the meeting booked,
I'm fine for the 18th.
okay. And then we're also going to just book, ladies, please, if this is our room, book it. So the 11th is on the 11th. Everything after that is at 10 through,
So the 18th
December.
will be at 10, but the 11th will be at 11.
and then that way we'll have a meeting scheduled with respect to reserving the room.
Yep.
We don't necessarily have to post notices, and we can just let them know.
Yep.
And you guys
Okay.
send the outlooks out, right?
Yep.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
18th.
Okay, so the 11th on the 11th and the 18th on the 10th for what we discussed today follow-up. All right, I've got nothing else, and we did date a next meeting. Can get a motion to
Motion to
adjourn?
adjourn.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, really great meeting.
Rebecca and Ally, thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Nat. Bye, Nat.
Nat, see you, man.
Do you have a minute to look at the green sheet? Oh,
Oh,